Hello, listeners. I am your host, Lana the Educator. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. Here we explore the latest educational trends, tackle pressing issues facing the education sector, and conduct insightful interviews with people making a difference. And we also share stories of triumph and innovation from around the globe. If you're interested in all of this, then stay tuned. Today, we welcome guest Marlon Green, who is a seasoned tour facilitator with over 17 years of experience, bringing the rich cultural and historical landscape of Trinidad and Tobago to life. With a background in history and geography education and formal training as a tour guide, Marlon has a gift for making history both accessible and engaging for his audiences. He specializes in heritage tourism education and promotion and is deeply passionate about mentoring emerging tour guides and curating unforgettable experiences for both local and international visitors. Marlon works closely with NGOs, government agencies, and private sector partners to champion the preservation and conservation of our heritage. What's his long-term vision? It is to establish sustainable community-based heritage tourism clusters that empower local communities and celebrate our shared story. Join me in welcoming Marlon Green to the podcast. Welcome, Marlon.
Thank you very much, Lana, and it's a pleasure being here. And welcome to all our listeners. It's a pleasure, as I said,
Yeah.
to be able to just talk about what I've been involved in for what seems like a lifetime.
That's good. But I know for some of our listeners, we might not know the terminology heritage tourism education. Or what does that mean to you to say heritage tourism education?
Well, if we were to kind of dissect it, we begin
Mm,
looking at heritage. Really, in talking with, especially for school children and so on, my
mm,
explanation usually would be for anything that has been in the past that is relevant and important in creating and making us who we are.
mm.
That is our heritage.
Right. So why do you think that's important in today's context, heritage tourism education?
Because especially for Trinidadians, there's a saying: if you don't know your past, then you really can't shape and chart your future,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So it's really about having an appreciation for the past,
Hmm.
for our shared histories, for the people who have gone before us, for the events that have taken place in our country that have shaped who we are as a people,
Hmm.
and beginning to have an appreciation, and we could use the term loosely, patriotic view of being what it is to be Trini, you
Hmm.
know? So it's really about appreciating our Trininess and Trinbagonianness,
Hmm.
because we look at people, especially we use Jamaicans as a example, how they are proud of who they are, and it's
Hmm.
really about us Trinidadians becoming proud of being Trini and
Hmm.
showcasing what it means to be a Trinidadian. I think Wendy Fitzwilliam really expressed it well when she won Miss Universe decades ago. Because
1990.
we are free-spirited, relaxed people, and we have to celebrate that. You know, it does not mean that people could walk all over us, but there's a strength that a Trinbagonian possess that in the midst of the storms and challenges of life, we could still be relaxed. We could
Right.
still find fun and find a joke in everything, even in the midst of difficult times.
Right.
And that's just who we are. And it doesn't mean that, you know, we don't take life seriously or anything. It simply means that in the midst of everything, we know how to enjoy life.
Right. Well said. Lovely. So it's not heritage tourism is more than sharing facts. It's not about just storytelling and connecting and preserving a legacy. That's nice to hear. And I think this type of work really would shape how people experience history as well. So what drew you to this particular path and has kept you so passionate about it all this time?
Well, it's interesting. I started off as a history teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized even back then was that there's a tendency to make history boring. But as a student, I know history could be exciting. So it was a
Mm-hmm.
challenge for me to really bring that excitement into the classroom.
Right.
And what I found made students really pay attention was when it was made, I use the term relatable, when they could see how it impacts them today,
Mm-hmm.
how it has affected their lives today, then people tend to focus a little bit more and begin to understand and appreciate it more, rather than just being um, a sort of academic endeavor. It becomes more practical
Mm-hmm.
and livable because history is people have lived through history and they have made it what it is,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so down the road, we will be part of history,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So it's really about learning from the past, appreciating the present, and charting a positive future.
Mm. So how do you make when you do your job, how do you make these historical narratives engaging and accessible for diverse audiences? Because when you engage in, heritage tourism education, as you say, and you're a tour facilitator, you have people from different backgrounds, different cultures, and everything like that. So how do you make those narratives engaging and accessible for those varied audiences?
So I like to take people from the known to the unknown. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you an example. So there's a tendency of Trinidadians to think that all Africans who came to Trinidad came as slaves,
Mm-hmm.
or they were enslaved people in trying to shape that narrative there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about getting people to understand that, you know, we had some Africans who came as freed individuals and made a significant contribution to the development of Trinidad and the landscape of the social landscape at the time. So I would then go into the stories of the Radas of Belmont, into the Americans,
Mm-hmm.
both those in Moruga, as well as those who were settled in Valencia and the East. And you look at some of the popular persons who um, were part of that experience, like, for example, the famous Papa Niza. Everybody, there's a Sparrow sang about Papa Niza being his grandfather, and so he was American. So
Mm-hmm.
it's talking about, you know, their lives, their experiences, what they have brought, things like the Gayap and so on, that we experience now, that we live through now, and that we enjoy now, things like the hill rice that is making that sort of resurgence. All of these things were brought by the Americans. They were not slaves in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they came at a time when, in the midst of a slave society, because they came around 1819, thereabouts, we were still um, living in a plantation economy with an enslaved labor force.
Right.
But you had these free people coming and living and existing and creating a space for themselves. You know, and you can't not begin to imagine how it would, the life they would have had, um, the experiences that they would have had. I mean, another sort of not, well, tangential to that is the Fourth Company, for example, that settled in an area that they found it was difficult to get the produce for the land to yield and then to get the produce out. And so they appealed to the governor and he said, you know, you've given us here a really hard bargain.
Mm-hmm.
And so the governor agreed. And so they moved from that hard bargain and he gave them a new grant. So you get an understanding of how place names came into being and how really how stuff and things that we experience now, how they came to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
that's the value of history.
Mm-hmm.
So that the generations to come, and I think that it is important for the generations, the younger generation now, to be, especially now, to see that it wasn't easy for our ancestors. And if they thrived and succeeded well in the midst of those challenges, when you all have it so much easier now, surely we could do better and must do better.
Nice, great. I know you touched on some interesting points there and tidbits. I mean, if you want more, you can, contact Marlon to book a tour and hear more about his knowledge. But do you have a favorite local legend or a historical anecdote that you love sharing with your groups when you take them on tours?
Wow. Yes, and it's kind of controversial,
Hmm.
but I'll share it anyway.
Right.
It's the story of the Sukuyan. So it said that when the French came, and that's another story because we were
Right.
never colonized by the French, captured by the French, and so on. But they came,
Right.
they brought with them this character who was Count Dracula,
Hmm.
right? And he lived on an island off of Harmin called Shodo. But he copulated he with some West African witches, which who resided in Belmont.
Right. Okay.
Offspring of that union is the Sukuyan,
Mm. Interesting.
right?
Yes.
And we all know about this. We tend to think of a Sukuyan as some old woman who lives alone somewhere,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then she would shed her skin in the night and turn into a ball of fire and go around sucking people,
Hmm.
right? And when I tell that story, many people then begin to say, I've experienced a Sukuya um, sucking me. I've experienced fighting off a Sukuya.
Wow.
It changed the whole, because the dialogue then on the tour, because it's very organic, it's nothing cast in concrete to say we're
Hmm.
going on a particular way and this is the way that the tour would go. It is all very interactive and it depends on who says what and question asked. That determines really how the tour would go.
Hmm.
And so it, when I tell that story, people would say, oh, and every mark that unexplained mark that you find on your body, people blame it on this schizophrenia, you know? Yeah, so that's why. And then in an area of Trinidad called Faitabat, they tell you about sukunya proof in your house. With the aloes, the um, all these
I
prickly
know about the
plants,
rice. I know about churn rice.
right? As well as salt,
So salt,
all
right?
these
Yes,
things,
in the skin.
things like that. So it's really very engaging, and I mean, even generations now, some people now wouldn't know about what is a sukunya,
No, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So that it's very interesting. And then there's this story of a sukunya from Paramin.
Hmm.
Her name was Desiree.
Hmm.
Somebody dared Desiree that she couldn't fly. And so to prove them wrong, Desiree flew to Buckingham Palace and stole Queen Victoria gold spoon and came back to Trinidad with it to prove that she could do it.
Yeah, yeah.
But upon arriving or coming into Trinidad, she was passing over this island, just close to the Bocas Island there in the first Boca,
Mm.
and she catch a malkadi. And again, what is a malkadi? So the whole explanation there, for the young generation who know what is a malkadi.
Hmm.
And so the ghost spoon fell and it landed on this island that is called Martetron Stute. And so it creates a whole aspect of our oral traditions that people may not be familiar with.
Hmm.
And I mean, it brings the history alive.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, so exciting and interesting to pass it on. Yeah. So
of course.
after almost 20 years in the industry, what changes have you observed, like in how the local people or the tourists engage with the heritage sites in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, thankfully, and it's interesting that you asked that because just today I was having this discussion with another gentleman who was feeling a little despondent and discouraged with
Mm-hmm.
the way heritage tourism is going in the country and the
Hmm.
whole heritage awareness and appreciation. But
Hmm.
having been in the industry for that length of time, I
Hmm.
have seen the progress that we've made. And I
Mm.
always use the reference and the analogy that Trinidadians now are widely traveled. And when they go abroad, they see what other countries have
Right.
and they realize that we have so much more and wonder what we're doing with it. And as we take them around, people have said, oh, they feel like a tourist in their own
Own
country.
country,
And I
yeah.
think, I mean, that says it all. So when they
Right.
begin to, we take them to places, of course, the question then arises, but then what are you doing to preserve? And we have to think about it. You can't look at just an institution to preserve our built and natural heritage, but we have to look at it as a personal responsibility.
Mhm.
And thankfully, on the tours that I conduct, I go to many areas around Trinidad where there are individuals and some groups involved in preserving, so that it gives people a little bit of encouragement. And so I always ask them, what can you do in your neck of the woods? What is there in your community, in your village, that some landmark or monument that exists that people just ask questions about and you have no real answers. But if you go back and do a little research, you may be able to find out how this came to be there. Right?
Mhm.
And so you treasure that, you keep it because it has contributed to the development of the village, the community in some way,
Mhm.
and to the country as well by extension.
Right. So just pivoting off the conversation that you said you were having with an individual today about how you're preserving, because you work with an institution, but we haven't shared that yet. I don't know if you want to share. So
I can.
yes, what institution is it, and can you tell us a little bit about what you do there?
All right, so I work on the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mhm.
The National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago was established by an act of parliament in 1991 with subsequent revisions, 1999, 2015. And the mandate of the National Trust is really the preservation and conservation of our built and natural heritage. Now, in order to do that, of course, we have different units within the organization with different responsibilities. For example, there's the Heritage Preservation Research Unit with responsibility for listing heritage sites.
Okay.
And then there's the Education Outreach Unit, with which the mandate really is the sharing of the history of Trinidad and Tobago and creating an awareness of the physical assets that exist, the physical heritage assets that exist in different communities, and of course, creating access to these assets, and of course, encouraging people to preserve and conserve. Yeah,
You've touched on, I'm gonna just thank you. Yeah. So you guys can contact the National Trust. I mean, I've been on their tours. It's really, as you said before, you really would hear the words coming out of your mouth. I feel like a tourist in my own country because there's so many places we have not seen, beautiful places in Trinidad and Tobago. Here, and Marlon does a amazing job of bringing those places alive. But you
thank
touched
you
on
very much.
how you incorporate community voices a little before when we were talking, and the local knowledge into the tours in terms of asking people what are you doing in your community and saying that there are people doing it, right? But you've also mentored many tour guides. So what qualities do you think would make a great tour guide today for people listening and might be interested in this as a career path? What
Somebody who
qualities?
likes to talk. One
A lot of people.
like
That's a
to
lot of
talk
people.
and like people. I mean,
Mhm.
excellent. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because I think that is the key there. Being able to interact with people from all different spheres of
Mhm.
life and be able to reach them at some point and create an emotional connection with the heritage, the physical heritage that they're seeing, and even not only the physical, but taking them back to when they were a child. And
Mhm.
that's one of the other things. Looking at people will remember their grandmother, things their grandmother used to do. And in reminiscing like that, you get an emotional connection and attachment to things. And so it then becomes more likely for you to become involved. And I think that's why we're now seeing, as I would like to think, as sort of a groundswell of support for heritage preservation and conservation. Now, because they remember the things mommy and granny used to do. I mean, some of the things that people that we do at the trust, for example, we take people on a bush tea tour,
Mhm.
and people would say, remember getting how much licks they get to drink this bush tea.
Mhm.
And some of the bush tea, I mean, it's an education for me too, because
Right.
some of the bush they're talking about, wasn't aware of, I didn't know about them, and it even caused me to go and look for them and plant them in my yard, and drink the tea ever so often.
Right.
you know um so, and I mean, it's healthy as well. And when you're going back now to this whole wellness, health and wellness, on of human well of people now,
Mhm.
it's another aspect of tourism that we could focus on, because we have these things here that healthy for us in our cocoa, for example. And people remember dancing the cocoa, for
Yeah.
those who had um whether they had cocoa estates in their area. Some would remember even riding a bull cart for those who lived in the cane farming community, things like that. And even grinding the coffee in this mill, and how you remember how difficult it was, how much you didn't like doing it. And the interesting thing is that the things you didn't like doing, people so enjoy doing it now when we take them on it, because it is very engaging and kind of hands-on. You go and you grind your own coffee and then drink it, or you go and you make your own roti and eat it. Things like that. It is really is captivating.
Right. And you told me prior to the interview that you work closely with NGOs and other public or private sector agencies in your line of work. So how do these partnerships help to further the heritage conservation efforts?
Well, what in working with these organizations is really about bringing the individuals in the different communities. So, for example, working with regional corporations, they
Mhm.
would have first-hand knowledge of people in their community that are involved in some way in heritage preservation and conservation, whether it be that they have a small museum in their house,
Mhm.
or in their backyard, they have some relic of the past, whether the mining, buffalo, anything of that sort, so that they would then get us in contact. So they bring us together,
Mhm.
and then we could then flesh out how we're going to bring people to have an experience at your space. You know, then we have, as I said, there are some organizations that are already involved. For example, the Mud House Museum in Faizabad, or the Cocoa Pile Museum in Flanagan Town. So you have people, you have individuals as well as groups involved in heritage preservation. So it's really about getting them together and working with them. Now, as you mentioned earlier, the long-term goal in creating these clusters is about having people come into a particular community and be able to spend an entire day, regardless of the age group. There must be something in a community that will be attractive to you, so that
Right.
you're looking at creating a domestic tourism product, and from that you could then expand outward to an international market, right? So that the people in the community themselves, they will come together and they will market their community as an attraction, and people from different parts of the country would then be um, drawn in and be posted by them at different points. Um, and so it becomes sustainable. And as, as, as these people come together, as the stakeholders come together,
Mhm.
as one unit with one voice, so that you come into an area and you have a total relaxing and engaging experience, you must go back and tell people. And so by word of mouth, by even social media and so on,
Right.
it spreads. And soon you have this domino effect, different communities emulating and being able to you know,
Mm.
benefit.
Right, great.
Yeah.
I mean, um, and of course, your the efforts are admirable, and a lot of people out there know about you, but there's so many more people who don't know that
Yes.
such a thing exists, and that there's a structure to it, and that you have as you mentioned before, these tourism clusters, and there are steps and a process that takes place. But just listening to you, and the mere fact that the terminology in in the job description says, there's conservation and preservation efforts, lets us know that there are some challenges out there that you obviously experience. So what would be some of the major challenges you have, or your organization has, in preserving the heritage of Trinidad and Tobago?
The major challenge is awareness
Mm,
of the population and a desire to protect what we have. There
mm,
is a tendency among Trinbagonians
mm,
that once it's old, break it down and get rid of it.
mm,
And so the major challenge is changing that mindset.
mm,
And so I mentioned earlier that I feel that there's been a shift in that regard, and we're
right,
seeing a lot more support than there were before.
right.
And I am thinking positively, the optimist that we are getting there.
But what can we do, just, as normal people, as citizens and so forth? What can we do on our part?
As a normal citizen, we could support those who are engaged and involved in preserving our heritage, because it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
It's not an inexpensive thing to do. And many people are just doing it out of their own passion. It's not a money-making venture. It's
No.
simply, just a labor of love in many cases. And so to give them that encouragement, you go and give them the support. Be willing to put your money where your mouth is. And I mean, you're getting something in return. It's not that you're just giving a handout. You
Mhm.
are supporting an individual in their endeavor, in their drive to preserve something for generations to come.
Mhm.
And so that would be one way as an individual, you could contribute. Another way is that you could look in your own community and see what there is that could be preserved. Get a village council together, or get a few people together and say, you know what, we're going to clear this site and we're going to try and preserve this thing so that scrap iron dealers ain't coming to take it, and things like that.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that we then, if everybody do their part in their little neck of the woods, then we would have more to treasure, more to appreciate.
A
All
few.
right, and
Go ahead.
so that's just basic
Yes.
some basic ways that we could get involved in heritage preservation and conservation.
Right. I know for a lot, you go out there and you talk about going on a tour or something historical, and a lot of people I've asked, you probably don't even know, they know you. They would say, "Oh yes, Marlon, I know Marlon," So, what legacy do you hope to leave, for generations and future generations in terms of the heritage sector? What legacy do you, Marlon Green, want to leave behind?
I want people to become passionate
Mhm.
about who they are and appreciate others, because Trinbagonians, we are very diverse society.
Mhm.
So talking about having, I think Archbishop Desmond Tutu mentioned it some time ago, this rainbow nation that we have.
Mhm.
We have to get to a point where we understand each other and be able to appreciate each other for being different,
Mhm.
and recognize that we all have a contribution to make. We have all made a contribution, appreciate the contribution that we have all made to develop Trinidad and Tobago to what it is today, and create and shape a better society going forward.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Marlon. Very informative and insightful. Of course, you listeners can check the links below to the National Trust to sign up and follow them, and of course, take a time to go on some of the tours. Thank you, Marlon, for joining us on Lana the Educator.
Thank you very much, Lana. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, well said. And with that, I want my listeners to know that you empower minds and you ignite curiosity.